Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story. Can Chinese-made cameras serve as Beijing's overseas spies? The U.S. warns the answer is yes. And the devices are capable of disrupting critical operations if they are installed in key networks. President Trump welcomes the Japanese Prime Minister to the White House. More on what the two leaders agreed on. America's healthcare industry is urging President Trump to make a tariff exception for Chinese medical supplies. They say levies on Chinese imports could send drug prices rising on U.S. soil. And China takes aim at Washington over Panama's decision to exit a major infrastructure deal. More on the competition heating up between the two powers. Homeland Security says Beijing is able to launch spy activities and disrupt key infrastructure on U.S. soil by using internet-connected cameras made in China. That's according to an ABC News report Thursday. In a bulletin issued to ABC News, the Department of Homeland Security mentioned 3 features of Chinese-made cameras that could allow Beijing to use them as spy tools. Those are a lack of data encryption, subpar security settings, and that their default settings allow Chinese manufacturers to communicate with the devices. The DHS warns that as of early last year, a large number of these cameras were in use inside hundreds of key networks in the U.S., including in the chemical and energy sectors. The big picture concern is that the cameras could help Beijing gain access to or even manipulate those key American systems, made possible by looser regulations on using these devices. So exactly how many are out there? The department estimates that at least 12,000 were installed in critical infrastructure networks across the U.S. as of early 2024. That figure saw a 40% jump from 2023 to 2024. Even though the Federal Communications Commission Office banned purchases from several leading Chinese camera manufacturers 3 years ago. The bulletin adds that Chinese state-funded hackers have already extensively targeted the vulnerabilities of these Chinese cameras for the past 5 years, meaning DHS's concerns could easily become reality. As of now, the U.S. government's efforts to block out these products are limited. Here's why. Sanctioned foreign businesses often use a strategy known as white labeling to skirt U.S. sanctions. The method is simple. Retailers first import cameras from Chinese manufacturers and then repackage the products with their own labels and sell them on the public market. DHS says one way to counter this loophole is to spread tools that can help identify Chinese cameras, especially those that have been white labeled. Next, we pivot to the medical industry, where cutting America's reliance on China for pharmaceuticals could be easier said than done. The American Hospital Association wrote a letter to President Trump earlier this week, warning him that his tariffs would affect cancer, heart medicine, and antibiotics from China. In the letter, hospitals and generic drug makers urged President Trump to exempt medical goods from his tariff hikes on China. Meanwhile, lobbyists in the health sector threatened that the tariffs would cause medicine shortages and that American patients would have to pay more for their prescriptions. On the other hand, top executives at several leading drug makers say the impact of the tariffs is limited. So how much does the U.S. medical industry rely on Chinese supply chains? According to a lobby group representing roughly 5,000 hospitals, nearly 1/3 of raw ingredients used to make critical drugs come from China. The 10% tariff on all Chinese goods imported to the U.S., including pharmaceuticals, took effect Tuesday, on top of existing levies on Chinese goods. NTD reached out to the White House for comment, but did not hear back before airtime. President Trump welcoming Japanese Prime Minister Ishiba to the White House Friday. The two leaders say they'll cooperate even more closely to combat aggression from China.
Today, our teams discussed how our two nations can do even more to stay on the cutting edge of artificial intelligence, along with the quantum computing, semiconductors, and other critical technologies. And they're coming out. The problem with technology, that kind, it's obsolete in about 2 days, so we have to start all over again. doesn't last long. We agreed to cooperate even more closely to combat the Chinese economic aggression, which is quite aggressive. I'm also pleased to announce that Japan will soon begin importing historic new shipments of clean American liquefied natural gas in record numbers. We're talking about the pipeline in Alaska, which is the closest point of major oil and gas to Japan by far, less than half the distance of any other location. We're talking about a joint venture of some type between Japan and us, having to do with Alaska oil and gas, and that's very exciting. They're very excited about it, so are we. As we deepen our economic relationship, I made clear that the United States will be conducting trade with all countries based on the principle of fairness and reciprocity.
Trump said he would work to cut America's trade deficit with Japan, which sits at $68 billion. He said he and the Prime Minister also discussed tensions on the Korean Peninsula. Trump praised the close U.S.-Japan alliance and said the two countries would work to maintain peace through strength in the Indo-Pacific. Regarding Ukraine, Trump said he would probably meet with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky next week and may also speak with Russian President Vladimir Putin about ending the war there. Trump also said he would announce reciprocal tariffs on a number of countries next week. China is blaming the U.S. for Panama's departure from the Belt and Road Initiative. The accusation came just days after Secretary of State Marco Rubio's visit to the Latin American country. On Friday, Beijing's foreign ministry took jab at Washington, saying Panama's exit from the project was due to what it called pressure and coercion from the U.S. Panama's president announced Thursday he would not renew Panama's Belt and Road deal and may even pull out of it early. That's in the wake of his meeting with Rubio. The American diplomat urged the Latin American nation to reduce the CCP's influence in the country. Rubio also said the U.S. is treaty-bound to protect the Panama Canal.
The United States has a treaty obligation to protect the Panama Canal if it comes under attack. That treaty obligation would have to be enforced by the armed forces of the United States, particularly the U.S. Navy.
In 2017, Panama became the first Latin American country to officially endorse the Belt and Road Initiative. The BRI is an ambitious infrastructure project largely seen as China's strategy to exert influence overseas. Through investment and construction, critics say the CCP is saddling less developed countries with large sums of debts, a move they refer to as debt trap diplomacy. And when they're unable to repay that debt, China takes long-term usage rights to the strategic infrastructure it funded. Over the years, China has also poured billions of investment dollars into infrastructure projects across Panama. That includes a bridge and two ports located at the Atlantic and Pacific ends of the Panama Canal. President Trump has long voiced concern over the communist regime's footprint in the strategic waterway. Australia's defense minister is visiting the Pentagon today, marking the first time U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth will meet with a foreign counterpart. The meeting ties into U.S. efforts to deepen military ties with partners across the Indo-Pacific region and to counter China. Australia made its first $500 million payment to the U.S. under the AUKUS nuclear submarine deal ahead of Friday's talks in Washington. Australian Defense Minister Richard Marles said the gesture showed Australia is paying its way as a security partner. In early meetings with the Trump administration, Australia emphasized plans to double its annual defense budget to $63 billion over the next decade. Likewise, Washington will sell several Virginia-class nuclear-powered submarines to Australia, while Britain and Australia will later build a new AUKUS-class submarine. Coming up, lawmakers on both sides of the aisle making plans for a bill to take Chinese AI chatbot off U.S. government devices. This comes as experts warn the app is capable of sending user data to authorities in China. And a Brazilian contractor for Chinese automaker BYD is in trouble. Authorities now investigating whether the company is guilty of labor abuse. More on what inspectors found out during a raid after the break here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. New warnings about Chinese AI chatbot DeepSeek. Cybersecurity experts said it's capable of sending user data directly to Chinese authorities. With more concerns surfacing, U.S. lawmakers are planning a bipartisan bill to ban DeepSeek from government-owned devices. Let's take a closer look.
Cybersecurity experts have found that DeepSeek's code can transfer user data to the Chinese government. DeepSeek is a Chinese AI firm that made an AI chatbot. This isn't just data from chatting with DeepSeek's AI, but all web activity, from Google searches to most visited websites.
They even collect keystroke information, which means that if someone is maybe logging into a website, keystroke information could allow them to extract credentials, login credentials.
Cybersecurity expert Star Cashman says there's good reason to be concerned about DeepSeek's security. Ontario-based cybersecurity firm Fairroot Security says it decrypted parts of DeepSeek's code, finding what looks like hidden programming. The code sends user data to Chinese website cmpassport.com, which is owned by China Mobile, a firm the FCC banned in 2019. DeepSeek also creates a digital fingerprint for every user, which can track web activity. Fairroot Security's findings have been deemed true by multiple cybersecurity experts.
100% accurate from our experience in counterintelligence. Same with other apps from China, TikTok, Temu, Shein, other apps. There's literally hundreds of those. They are weaponized to send all of your data back to the CCP.
Cybersecurity expert Casey Fleming says DeepSeek should be banned. The U.S. Navy banned DeepSeek late January. Senator Josh Hawley has introduced the bill that may ban DeepSeek nationwide.
South Korea, Australia, and Taiwan have already restricted government employees from using China's DeepSeek AI. All three of them said the app poses a security risk. Did Chinese AI chatbot DeepSeek actually out-innovate U.S. rivals as it claimed? We spoke to Rex Lee for his take. He's a cybersecurity advisor for My-Smart Privacy. Here's more.
No, because a lot of the innovation built into DeepSeek actually came from American-made IP developed by OpenAI, Alphabet, Google, Microsoft, NVIDIA, and so forth. So what people don't understand is the fact that there's three operating systems, and they're developed by Google, Apple, and Microsoft. They actually have a monopoly over the operating system market globally for smartphones, tablet PCs, and connected products. So when DeepSeek needs to develop their version of AI, they have to have developer tools from Google, Apple, and Microsoft so that the app works on the operating systems globally. Otherwise, they would not get any distribution. Also, what people have failed to understand, it's Google, Apple, and Microsoft that are distributing or controlling the global distribution of AI-infused apps and platforms, whether they're developed in the United States or not. What's been happening over the last 5 or 6 years, unbeknown to billions of people around the globe, is these innovators of AI and just apps and platforms and applications that work on all of these connected devices through the Android OS, Apple iOS, and Microsoft Windows 8, 10, or 11 OS, all of these developer tools, including for AI and the technology, is shared with thousands of Chinese companies with no oversight.
The U.S. Navy banned the use of DeepSeek over security and also ethical concerns. Now, given the, say, AI race that we're in, President Trump called DeepSeek a wake-up call. Where do you see that AI race going if we are sharing everything?
Well, they have what we have today, and they can develop it more efficiently and cheaper because they didn't have to put the money into the R&D. They didn't have to put the money in the R&D of the GPU chips that drive their AI. They can just buy them from NVIDIA. If they want to develop an AI-infused app, well, they get the AI-infused apps developer tools to develop the apps that have AI in them today. Like TikTok today isn't the same TikTok it was 5 years ago. It's been enhanced with AI developed by ByteDance through the same developer tools that they get for to develop the apps and platforms to work on these three operating systems. So there's never going to be, as long as we are driven, as long as Google, Apple, and Microsoft monopolize the operating system market, they control global access to internet trade and commerce. So the only way that Chinese companies can get access to global internet trade and commerce is through the development of apps and platforms and AI that work on the Android OS, Apple iOS, or Microsoft Windows 8, 10, or 11 operating systems. So what would happen today, if you wanted to secure everything today, you would have to obsolete those 3 operating systems and go to a true, secure, decentralized operating systems the way they used to work. Like Windows 7 had closed API architecture for true security. Well, they opened all that up with Windows 8. Why? Because they wanted the apps to share data with each other so that the app developers can collect that data and then go sell it for targeted advertisers. You would have to go back to the way operating systems were developed before the Apple iOS and then later Android and then Windows 8, 10, 11. We'd have to go back to the same architecture, the way operating systems used to be developed all the way up until the mid-2000s.
All right, Exley, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me on.
A lawmaker in the UK is highlighting the Chinese regime's persecution of faith group Falun Gong and attacks against classical dance company Shenyang Performing Arts during a parliament debate Thursday. Here's Member of Parliament Jim Shannon.
For the last 25 years, Falun Gong practitioners in China have suffered relentless persecution in the hands of the Chinese Communist Party. Reports from human rights organisations highlight that millions have been subjected to imprisonment, forced labour and torture simply for practising their faith. What is deeply troubling is the expansion of this campaign beyond China's borders. Leaked reports from China's Ministry of Public Security indicate that the regime is now escalating efforts to eliminate Falun Gong worldwide, using a network of spies, social media, disinformation and harassment of practitioners, even here in this great United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
The Member of Parliament and co-chair of the Cross-Party Group for International Freedom of Religion or Belief stressed that the Chinese Communist Party's persecution is not just an attack on religious freedom, but also an affront to British values, democracy, and the rule of law. He is urging the government to urgently investigate and counter the influence of the CCP's transnational repression in the UK. This includes CCP attacks on Falun Gong practitioners and its attempts to censor Shenyang performances. Falun Gong, also known as Falun Dafa, is a spiritual meditation practice that rose to popularity in China in the 1990s. It's based on the principles of truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance. The CCP launched a brutal campaign of persecution against Falun Gong in 1999, which continues to this day. And we are learning more about a labor abuse investigation in Brazil involving Chinese workers building a new plant for Chinese electric car brand BYD. The workers were lured by higher wages, but getting out of the job proved difficult. A BYD contractor is now coming under scrutiny for slave labor practices. NTD's Sean Marshall has more details.
According to a labor contract seen by Reuters, the Chinese workers hired by BYD contractor Xinjiang in Brazil worked under abusive clauses. For example, they had to hand over their passports to their new employer, let most of their wages be sent directly to China, and fork over an almost $900 deposit that they could only get back after 6 months' work.
There have been other cases across the globe over the decades of car manufacturers not being aware that slave labor is being used or child labor has been used because of a third-party contractor. So many times components or subcomponents are manufactured, or even assembly plants in other countries are using sub-companies to build the plant, to produce the product, and they're unaware. In many cases, they are aware and they just say nothing because it cuts costs. But in this case, this is completely unreasonable.
Brazilian investigators and 3 Chinese labor law experts say the 3-page document includes clauses that violate labor laws in both Brazil and China. Labor inspectors in Brazil freed 163 workers from what they called slavery-like conditions last month.
A report of this gigantic operation that was carried out by the Labor Prosecutor's Office with the federal police rescued 163 Chinese in conditions analogous to slavery. 1 bathroom for every 34 people having to wake up at 4:30 in the morning. Imagine the inhumane conditions they were being treated in.
Other clauses gave the BYD contractor the power to unilaterally extend the labor contract for 6 months. It could also issue fines to workers for conduct such as swearing, quarreling, or walking around shirtless at the site or in their living quarters. Xinjiang denied the allegations, saying in a statement last month, quote, "The claim that Xinjiang's employees were enslaved and rescued is totally off base." 2 weeks later, a raid by labor inspectors found the workers living crammed in lodgings without mattresses. 21 workers were crammed in a single house with only one bathroom and food piled up on the ground alongside personal belongings. Inspectors described these as degrading conditions.
There are some dangers when you outsource your manufacturing or your subcomponents to an individual company because you don't know what their rules and practices are. Each country has their own rules and regulations, and even though slave labor is illegal in China, even though they have Uyghurs, also in Brazil, this is a dilemma that needs to be resolved because it falls on the main company that hired everyone.
Sean Marshall, NTD News.
That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. For round-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you soon.